I'm Russ Rapp, and I want to thank all of you who made comments to my previous video where I was asking for your input and questions. Really helps motivate me to come up with ideas for things to talk about in these videos. The main subject that I want to focus on is awakening, but I've also spent many hours talking about non-duality, so that is also on the table. So let's just jump right into it. I want to bring up a comment from someone and read through it, and then we'll talk it over. So this one comes from Martin AG2203, and she says, "More non-duality, please. Do you have children? And if yes, can you share how you deal with the one topic on a daily basis? As I am a single mom, I have some challenging moments with this. And what about all those conspiracy theories, and how do you see these with an really awakened consciousness? Are they even relevant or not relevant? Or are they just forced distractions maybe? Sorry for my English, not my mother tongue, and grateful for you asking." So let's just jump into the conspiracy theories part first and talk about that as it relates to awakening. So I think anytime we discuss terms like that, you kind of have to take a step back and look at how those words or phrases are used. So when it comes to this idea of awakening in general, oftentimes we think of it in terms of the thoughts or the beliefs that we have, the information that we've gleaned about the world, and use that as a benchmark, as a bar for how quote unquote awake we are, or woke, depending on your background. So it's one of those things where we're in this point in time where the idea of having an awakening does have a lot to do with this idea of knowledge, information, because we are in the information age, but at the same time it's kind of a narrow view to just consider that as a part of awakening, because awakening is much bigger than that. And so when it comes to the idea of conspiracy theory, let's look at kind of the words themselves and give us an idea of what those words mean. So conspiracy from dictionary.com says, the act of conspiring, an unlawful, harmful, or evil plan formulated in secret by two or more persons, a plot, a combination of persons for such an unlawful, harmful, or evil purpose. Law, an agreement by two or more persons to commit a crime, fraud, or other wrongful act. Any occurrence in action combination in bringing about a given result. So there's kind of a few different connotations when it comes to the idea of conspiracy. The basic idea is that there's two or more people working together to achieve a purpose, and the other part of it is that purpose is usually nefarious or negative. A theory, I'm not going to read every single theory from a definition from a dictionary.com, but a theory is a coherent group of tested general propositions commonly regarded as correct that can be used as principles of explanation and prediction for a class of phenomenon. A proposed explanation whose status is still conjectural and subject to experimentation, in contrast to well-established propositions that are regarded as reporting matters of actual fact. And then later on it says contemplation or speculation, guess or conjecture. So it kind of runs the gamut of a theory being a well-tested hypothesis that is, in general terms, we would see as being true on a deep level. And when it comes to like the theory of relativity, yes, there's a theory behind it, but we see that, we witness that, and there's ways that we can kind of confirm that is true to a large extent. So to go from that end of the spectrum to this idea of a theory being just conjecture or a guess or speculation. So when you put those two together, conspiracy theory, it's this idea of there's two or more people working together, which happens all the time. Any crime or plan to do some sort of like a bank robbery or something like that. Anything that has foresight most likely has some aspect of conspiracy. And in this sense, conspiracy theory typically that leans towards this idea of being more conjecture, speculation. So we've kind of defined the terms, but when it comes to the usage of conspiracy theory in everyday vernacular, typically that's a way to kind of downplay the significance of what's being looked into, or to consider something to be outside the bounds of normalcy. So, if you're talking about quote-unquote conspiracy theories, then you're talking about things that aren't generally accepted by society. And so a lot of that plays into the natural human condition of wanting to be a part of a group, wanting to be accepted, this idea of civilization, of human beings coming together and bonding. So anytime you can put people out and kind of atomize people, or segregate them into some sort of box, label them, then it's easier to kind of disregard the information that's being presented. So when it comes to this idea of awakening and conspiracy theories, I think really we're at the point where there is a lot of focus on rational thought, logical arguments, really seeing things for objectively how they are, but also in the idea that that is to some extent a limitation. There is also kind of a trans-rational viewpoint that would say, just because you can observably see something or say that it's a fact, there is a limitation to that, in the sense that logic only gets you so far. So in another sense, as human beings, if you think about it in terms of, if you're arguing with your spouse and you're trying to win a fight, an argument, discussion, whatever you want to call it, with logic, oftentimes, especially as a husband, if you're talking to your wife, you can't win using information, facts, logic a lot of times, because it has nothing to do with that. It's more about the emotion behind that, or just making the other person feel heard or safe in the conversation. And so it's not necessarily about winning an argument, because a lot of times as human beings we look at things from many different perspectives, and it could be simultaneously. So sometimes people refer to it as, am I thinking with my head or my heart? We also have the gut level that can play a factor, so that this idea of sensing fear, or having this feeling of being uncomfortable, can kind of tip us off to a situation that maybe we should avoid or handle in a certain way. So when you talk about this idea of processing information, you have to see where people are coming from in their perspective and how they're really viewing it. The pre-rational perspective typically focuses more on the emotional side of it, and seeing things as a way to interpret things as good or bad versus like true or not true. And so when you're having a debate regarding an ideology or a belief, and it's really heavily cited on the idea of feelings, then you're arguing from a point of, is this good or bad? So it doesn't necessarily matter to a certain extent if what you're saying is true, but who is the better person, who has the better values or morals. And so it oftentimes goes away from logical thinking and goes into the realm of emotion. So you have to understand where that person would be coming from in that situation. And so when it comes to conspiracy theories, oftentimes how that works is a way to shut down logical thinking, or to automatically place that thought process in the realm of the bad or the negative. And so it's a way to kind of damper discourse, to shut down debate or discussion, to basically name call, or the argument would be an attack on the person or the subject itself, in order to not really delve deeper. So when you are approached with this idea of conspiracy theory, oftentimes there's a fear base behind it where people can easily be manipulated by using this feeling of fear in order to shut down any sort of logical thinking. So that's kind of how it works when it comes to that. So when it comes to awakening in conspiracy theories, basically, if you can kind of separate the logic from the feeling, or at least be aware of that, and aware that there is a differentiation, not necessarily a dissociation between the two, then you can look at it from a more open perspective and look at information that maybe you would normally disregard. And so that's kind of my rundown on conspiracy theories, but let's get to the other part of the comment and questions, which was about children and dealing with the idea of the one. So yes, I do have children. So when it comes to this idea of the one, again, it's one of those situations where when we discuss it, we're discussing it as an idea or a concept. So it's coming from a more abstract, linguistic-based form where we're not really, it's kind of this limitation of rationality or limitation of logic, where you can't explain it to someone. You can't explain oneness or non-duality, and so words and logic kind of fall away at that point, because there's nothing, you can't prove oneness. So when I make videos about non-duality and adults watch it, oftentimes they have a lot of questions. They don't understand it. It's because they're trying to understand it through the mind, and that's obviously how we discuss the topic. So, and I'm a very heavy on the thinking side as far as my personality goes. So that's kind of my go-to typically. But when you just focus on that area and don't realize that there is a limitation in the thinking, that's where you kind of run in circles essentially. So let's see, non-duality and oneness with your children, you have to also realize that when it comes to talking about abstract concepts and you're talking to a young child, they're not going to necessarily understand the idea of oneness. So what potentially could end up happening is you force some sort of framework on the child that they don't understand, and it's kind of set the bar high enough where it's never attainable. So you want to make sure that you build the child up, give them confidence in the world, recognize their boundaries, and let those naturally develop and grow and expand, essentially, because they're not going to understand intellectually the idea of oneness as a child, and so it's going to kind of go over their head, and otherwise they'll just verbatim repeat whatever you say back to them, just because they get a positive payoff when they do that, because they're listening to you. It's like having a newborn baby and getting upset at the baby because it's crying because it's hungry. It's like, well, shouldn't you understand that there's oneness? Why are you crying? The world's great. It doesn't make any sense. So when it comes to that and parenting, I think you can kind of look at it from two different perspectives. One is honoring where they are in their development and not trying to speak to them in terms that they don't understand. Young kids understand the golden rule: treat others as you would like to be treated. That's pretty straightforward. So that's something they can grasp onto. As they get older, I'm a Christian, and so Jesus' teaching is he loved everyone, and he was willing to die for everyone and to forgive them for that. And so that is an example that's set that you can use in your own life to say, this is kind of the path that I want to emulate. But the other side to child raising is not only do you see them as, okay, this is a 6-year-old person, or this is a 10-year-old, and relate to them in the way that makes sense to their development. The flip side is to also honor the fact that they are divine human beings, see them as a soul, because it puts it in a perspective where you're not the arbiter of reality necessarily. You're obviously there as a parent to love and to guide them, but you're not there that knows everything and they should just follow your orders in a sort of a controlling way. Because, you know, if you think of it in terms like if we were souls that decided to come into this world in this relationship, essentially, like your child is going to eventually grow up. Right now you see them as a kid, but essentially like the acorn in the tree, they are an adult in waiting. And so if you honor the fact that they aren't lesser than you just because they're in a different stage in their development, you see them for their eternal nature, that I think will kind of give a different perspective in lieu or in contrast to seeing them in the age appropriate development that they are. So that is, I guess, my 2 cents on that. So I don't know if you could hear that in the video, but I think it's just a garbage truck. So, well, I appreciate you if you followed me through this video up to this point. I thank you for listening, and if you have any more ideas, comments, questions, like I said, that is what motivates me to make these videos, so I appreciate any input you would have. Feel free, that's life for you. Feel free to comment below, and if you haven't subscribed yet, do that. I'll be hopefully making some more videos here going forward, and yeah, so I hope everything is great in your life and continues to be that way, and may God bless you.